I want to start off by thanking Shalu Garg. Shalu's here. She's our executive sponsor for today for this event by Microsoft for Startups. And I want to thank everybody else who's here in making this event possible. The main purpose and the main idea behind this event was to bring together a group of amazing people in the venture community to create like an executive forum where we could learn from each other and exchange ideas around startups and artificial intelligence. And I just want to thank all of you for being here today. We're going to kickstart a panel, and I want to thank our moderator, Sandra. Sandra is like from Forbes AI. She writes for Forbes AI, and she will be moderating our panel today. We also have on this panel Insec Ree. Insec is the general partner of Vortex Ventures and also founded LoudCloud with Mark Andreessen back in the days, one of the investors in Facebook with SL, and also Jean English. I am so excited to see Jean here today. So Jean is the former CMO of NetApp and current CMO of Palo Alto Networks. She's one of the most amazing marketers ever. Ken Elephant is an amazing person. He is the founder, the general partner of Sorensen Ventures, and former managing director of Intel Capital. Shalu, I've already introduced everybody to Shalu. A big round of applause for Shalu. And Puneet is the managing director of Singtel Innovate Ventures. I am so excited to kickstart this panel. I want to thank so many people out there in the audience. I wish I could mention each and every person.
Great. Welcome, everybody, and thank you, amazing panelists. I'm Sandra Ponce de Leon. I am a writer for Forbes. I cover AI, and I also have a marketing and PR agency that's called the Blue Economy Agency, and we are focused on ocean tech and companies that are doing their part for the good of the ocean. So thank you all for being here. Amazing panelists. Did you guys want to add anything to the initial introductions that Aku gave you? No? You guys are good? Okay, cool. Well, let's kick it off with the foundation of AI, which is good data. Let's talk about what it means to have a good data strategy. So Jean, can you help us with that topic?
Sure. So, good evening, everyone. So I just came from NetApp, and we were so focused on trying to figure out, how are people thriving or surviving in terms of data? And so we did this study called this Data Thriver Report. And what we did is we interviewed companies around the world, all industries, and I think the thing that we found that was so important is that data has to be an asset in the company, has to be super high quality, has to be number one priority, and that the business and IT can't see it as separate. They have to all come together to really prioritize how they focus on data seamlessly across all the organizations. It has to make sure we've got data maps. So a data strategy is really critical before you can even think about what you're going to do with the data for AI. And that was a big part of the learning that we got.
The topic here is about startups and VC, and if you think about data strategy and the advantage that having a large data set provides you, startups certainly have a disadvantage when they're coming into the market. So how do you suggest that they navigate that landscape in terms of being sort of data poor but tech rich? Ken, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so from my perspective, we do a lot of investments in security companies. And startups need to figure out what they are from a data strategy point of view. Either they're going to create some new, unique points of data and then combine that with other sources, or they're going to be the best at figuring out how to analyze this data. And having come from Intel Capital, I think it's really incumbent on startups to partner with large companies that do have other aspects of data. And at Palo Alto Networks, I know you're very good at partnering with startups as well. There are really good companies like McAfee that have programs like the Security Innovators Alliance, and it's great that they actually give their data to startups and let startups provide a more holistic approach. Now, obviously, there's something in it for the large companies, but I think that in every aspect of AI, whether it's security or whether it's computer vision or something else, I think that large companies have a very important role to play on that.
So you're suggesting startups look to partner with corporations, pretty much from the get-go.
Corporations need to take the first step forward. There's not a bigger waste of time for a startup to start with a large company that doesn't want to partner with them. And that's why I said the startup needs to have their strategy in place first. If they have unique data, that can be very beneficial to a large company.
Shalu, how does Microsoft look at the partnership between startups?
Yeah, so just adding to what Ken said, oftentimes sitting in a corporate seat, and I have spent many years on the corporate side and quite a few on the startup side, oftentimes what happens is corporates think that they have sort of an authority, unspoken authority over startups, right? And so we were just having this conversation prior that the usual disposition is startups are agile, they are faster, they're cheaper, they are easier to pivot. And when it comes to data, right, it's pretty rich. It's, you just can't take data and change the data and say, okay, I'm doing something else. And so one of the things that I always coach the startups, even though I'm on the other side, but the startups that I work with is, look guys, stick to what you're building. Do not let anyone maneuver you unless you feel that it's beneficial to you. So I think not that corporates want to do that, but there is always that lineation to drive that conversation, either in customers' favor, a corporate customer's favor, or corporate itself. But every coin has two sides, and it's just with right coaching how you drive that conversation.
Aku, I know you have a lot of experience in this area. Do you want to chime in as well?
Yeah, I think that data is the lifeblood, and data-driven decisions are incredibly important in terms of operations for big companies as well as startups. And today, every company is trying to do artificial intelligence. But what we really need to understand is that access to data is limited, and many of these big corporations do have access to data, whereas startups, not necessarily. It's kind of more difficult. So partnering with big corporations gives startups an advantage. And it's not only about access to data, it's also about the quality of data that they have access to and the quantity and a variety of things. So I think like with big companies like Microsoft, being able to help startups and offer these advantages, that partnership is extremely valuable for startups.
Maneet, what about you? Do you have anything to say on the topic?
I'm like last in the line here, but sorry, insecure to be last. I think startups need to choose like what game they're playing. And so when I look at analytics or data or strategies, that there are either you own the data, it's yours, it's unique, or it's partnered in and it's valuable. You process the data better. You've got a better algorithm or secret sauce and how you're going to play with it, or you productize it into a certain vertical in a unique way that adds value in a specific way that's out there. And startups fail sometimes because they don't own the data. They think they do. It's brokered in. It's commoditized. Other people own it. They fail because the middle of it, the algorithm is pretty much a commodity, and maybe Google or Microsoft or someone else can give it to it as a service for free, or they're verticalized in a way that the person's not really willing to pay what they expect to pay in that for that category. And so we see the whole gamut of the startups that we see, and it's a very clean line. For those that think that they own the data, make sure you own the data. Make sure it's a unique asset, and it really is the oil or the gold that you can control. In most cases, it isn't, right? In 90% of the cases, it isn't, because it can be brought in from second sources, or it can be commoditized faster than you think. And if you're trying to differentiate on the AI or the algorithm middle, I mean, that's a tough game, but people have done a good job at that. Some people have really broken out and succeeded, but not many, right? And usually it's as verticalized you can take it to the customer to make sure the product actually meets the market need, and you can build a scalable business model on the other side of it. Those are the ones that succeed. I mean, it's kind of obvious. Go where the money is. The money's the customer. It's not some data block in the middle or some data that's far away from customer demand. So that's how we look at it.
Great. Ninsik, what do you feel about this topic? And should there be some considerations that startups have when they're going to play with the large corporates?
So I think startups have many startups have a technology's view of sort of the world or problems that they're trying to solve, so which is a little bit like bottom-up thinking. And one common mistake they make when they approach sort of large organizations or enterprises is they think they should go to the ivory tower of the CIO's office or the IT department. When it comes to data, actually, that's not a good strategy. I think most companies understand and realize the data is actually driven, the need of information technology and analysis is driven by the lines of business, not IT. So IT is actually responsible for delivering the value, but they don't understand the context of what their customers are often asking for. So one of the really important things for startups to do is understand who your actual customer champion is in terms of who are you unlocking the value for. It's usually not IT. I mean, IT is also sometimes a buyer and a user of information technology, but they're a fairly small constituent or stakeholder in that equation. Usually it's the marketing department, it's, sometimes it's HR, a lot of it's sales driven, a lot of it's customer success and retention. So having a clear, concise view of what organization within the enterprise that you're trying to make successful is really critical.
One of the topics that's very near and dear to my heart is AI for social good. I'd love to hear your thoughts on why this is important, why it's important to bake a code of ethics into the AI that you're developing, and how that impacts your growth strategy. So who wants to take that first? I'll see, show hands. Who wants to raise their hand and take that? Shalu, how about you?
Yeah, sure. So AI for good is a topic that's near and dear to my heart as well, and I'm going to sort of divide my response here in two buckets. One is the corporate bucket, which is the Microsoft bucket, and the other is United Nations, which is my nonprofit philanthropy space. I'm going to take actually the nonprofit space first. There is some phenomenal work that's happening in the world around AI for good, and I often give this analogy that kids of this generation, like school-going kids, their biggest problem right now is that their iPhones are not charged or their iPads are not charged, right? But okay, sorry.
First world problems.
Exactly. But I have literally been in places like Uganda, Somalia, Syrian refugee camps, where the biggest problem is boys can go to school and girls cannot. And you sit there and you look around and you see boys going out and the girls are not allowed to go. And that's where you start to question your knowledge and experience, which is, hey, back in Silicon Valley, I'm working for this Fortune 100 company, right? How can I use technology to make that difference? And so from there are a lot of things that are happening in the philanthropy space. A very simple example is in Uganda, in partnership with Apple, we are actually supplying 50,000 iPads, which are sitting in their inventory, totally refurbished. And we are educating girls, in the periphery of their homes. The other example I would give in Southeast Asia, one of the areas that we're looking at is how to reduce human sex trafficking using AI. And so, it's pretty powerful. If you look here, sitting in Silicon Valley, all we are surrounded with, and I speak this with humility, is, hey, how do I make my next million? Or how do I get my next Series A or C funding? And when you go to a Syrian refugee camp, their biggest problem is, how do I send my daughter to school? And that's where AI comes in in such a big way. So, coming back, tying back to your question, phenomenal use cases, right? But there is an evil side to it as well, which we'll talk about. But absolutely, I think the time is right, the market is right. There's a lot of capital in the market. There are a lot of good folks in the market who understand the landscape and who wants to make a change.
Aku, did you want to add to that?
I think that's a really great answer, and I think that AI could be used very positively to really impact and drive and transform things, just like Shalu gave in her example. And I think a lot of even startups today are pivoting towards kind of embracing AI for a purpose, AI to change the world and transform the world, and I think that's really powerful. But I completely, empathize with what Shalu said. Like, the kind of, like, I personally come from India. I was born in India, and similar, like, India is an amazing country, but like similar to what Shalu said, like in certain parts of India, we have similar problems, like girls can't go to school, and it's different in different parts of India. But like, how can we like help resolve some problems like that and make, you know, it a better place for everybody? So I think that's really impactful.
Absolutely. Puneet, did you have some, I mean, does Singtel have a code of ethics in terms of your investment strategy and thesis, or are you looking for startups that have a social good component to what they do?
I mean, honestly, we're a general tech shop. We invest in everything that's there. Of course, we try and take an ethical view in the investments that we make. So it's not so much that there's a code of ethics that we're trying to follow specific to AI. It's just generally do good with our investments. It's not in that sense. But just to chime into some of the conversation that was said, I mean, in the United States, we take for granted connectivity. We take for granted the fact that data can be accessed. It's somewhat siloed here, but you can still access it. You can still build a business around it. You go into Southeast Asia, you go into Africa, and it's just not accessible, right? So the first step of these businesses is creating effectively pipes and communication frameworks that can enable things to occur. And we've invested in many businesses across Southeast Asia that try and create that unified platform, right? That allow to say if a doctor is talking to a patient, there's a telemedicine service that's out there, the data goes across a pipe, the pipe gets stored in a repository, that's a good place to run AI. Right? If you don't have a common repository, you can't run AI. It doesn't work, right? And so that general strategy in Asia is just starting to bubble up, right? We're just getting to the point where silos are getting broken down, where technology is being readily adopted everywhere in a way that enables centralization of data to then create the algorithms on top of them to create the impact. There's always going to be a new app that's verticalized in some way, but if it's not centralized, you can't get the reach that you need to have across that. And so we're just starting to see those pipes be established in Asia.
Great. Ken, what are your thoughts here?
I think the really cool thing about this question is that it's opening up new markets for startups. And what I've seen is that the largest companies that are out there are spinning out thousands of new machine learning and AI models on a weekly basis. And the bottleneck before was that you had to have a machine learning engineer that knew how to cobble together all the tools and the systems management and the DevOps. Now the bottleneck is on the compliance side, because the way that compliance is getting done is done in a very manual way. And so I think it's really interesting that this ethical aspect has now turned into a potential market opportunity, because it is the bottleneck for launching new paradigms. So I'll give you an example just to kind of make it clear. So like if you're Wells Fargo and you're giving home loans, it's pretty obvious in the old way that you're doing home loans that you cannot discriminate. The way that these new AI models are constructed, it's very difficult to suss that out. So that's where this new compliance play would happen. And is it okay if I use the example we were talking about before? And then we love physical security, you know, where you have a video camera inside of enterprises, because you want to stop the thieves from doing bad things. But if your computer vision model only goes after short guys like me with bushy eyebrows, that's not very fair. So
you do look very suspicious.
Yeah. So you need so you need to make sure that these models are only using the data that they should be using, and that data is clean. And that last example is N6, but I thought it was awesome.
Jean, Instinct, did you want to chime in on that? No? I think it's really interesting, you know, what you all touched on. I think both like the regional differences that are evolving in the emerging world, and also, you know, also some of the biases that are built into AI. And I always think about the topic of, is AI an equalizer, or does AI amplify our biases that are already there? What are your guys' thoughts on that? Instinct, do you want to take this one?
So AI is actually very good at teasing out outliers. And so when we look for, you know, feature engineering, like in AI, the computer processes billions and billions of events to really understand how to then categorize different, you know, sounds or learnings or views or images. And so what it looks to do then is really classify based on some some form of differences. So I think by nature, then you're looking for, you can't have just generalization of everything, because then AI is actually not as effective in order to find these outliers. So I think it's going to create weights and biases around those specific features, whether it's your facial mold or makeup, or based on color, shape, size, etc. And I think what we asked AI to actually parse for us is actually the important thing, that we don't. We need to understand how to do it in a way where we teach the machines how to then apply ethics, to the equation, and that's something that I think requires a bit of a human in the loop in the process, so that humans can actually then sort of be part of the process to know what's good versus bad, because machines don't know what's good, what's bad. They can't infer intent. Humans are very good at these things. So some combination of an automation system with a bit of a human in the loop has been what we've seen to be quite effective in things like physical surveillance.
I think a big focus right now, even in different professions, is how to make the customer's experience extraordinary. And what does it mean to use AI to think about designing experiences? But that takes humans to be creative and thinking about what that experience might be. Now, AI fine-tunes it, it learns from it, it decides what's the next best action this customer might take, it then learns from that. So there's a continuous learning constantly. But humans are still designing and creating and innovating on what those experiences and all those opportunities might be. But AI is becoming a bigger part of how those experiences actually come to fruition. It's becoming a bigger part of how we're able to dream even bigger.
Yeah, and I thought our conversation earlier where we talked about the makeup of your marketing team was really fascinating. You have 10 data scientists on your marketing team.
We do. We have 10 data scientists who are working on how to look at customer experiences, customer segmentation, what's the next best actions a customer might want to take, how do we score to help them get faster to the solution that they may want to see, how do they get faster to talk to someone when they're ready immediately to want to talk to someone right away. But all of that is behind the scenes. It's a bigger part of, I think, marketing as a profession spend. And I think that's regardless of company size. That might be a startup or that might be a large corporation. But marketing as a profession, using AI to think about the customer, so getting the data closer to who is our customer's customer is really important.
Great. Anyone else want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I'll just add to this. I think there's a responsibility that lies on corporates as well. So, if you look at consortium, there is one that is around, that includes Google, Intel, Facebook, especially Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, right? And so when we talk about bias and when we talk about what Jean is mentioning about really understanding the customer experience, it is very critical to tap into the brain power that consortium has, right? And I know there are a lot of articles or news press releases that are out there, but I just want to call that out, that not every time is a corporate in the right spot, right? Oftentimes we look upon as big corporates thinking, gosh, these are the guys who are making the rules, or these are the guys who are working with some cool technologies. But oftentimes we do go wrong, right? And that's where the innovation, the startups, the data pool of data scientists come in. So definitely a very, very relevant topic in the industry.
I think there's this balance of data science and data privacy.
Yeah.
And how do you have the respect for the customer to know what data they want to give and not give, and how to respect the willingness of them to share that information and to not overuse it or misuse it.
Well, it sounds like you're putting it on the data scientists then to have that ethics, the ethics built in.
I think it's everyone's responsibility. So in Jean's team, as much as she has 10 data scientists, at some level she's equally responsible, right? And folks around her as well. So responsibility, I think, comes at every level. Ultimately, there are some folks who will execute and others will strategize.
Great. Well, let's switch topics a little bit. And I mean, we did touch on it just shortly. Let's talk about cybersecurity. How does AI play a role in cybersecurity, and what are the trends that you're seeing? Jean, how about we start with you?
So I've been at Palo Alto Networks for 30 days.
Wow.
So I am an absolute expert. You know, what's interesting is that there are a lot of bad actors out there right now that are using AI not for good. They're using it to harm. And one of the things that I think we have to be careful about is knowing, you know, what are they doing and how do we use AI to combat that? They're no longer using humans. They're using software and machines and AI to think about what are the ways that they're going to try to attack. And so, you know, what we're doing right now is thinking through how do we start to get smarter? How do we start using more AI so that we can do more to detect? How can we use AI to constantly learn? Be able to think through, you know, what's that next step of attack? It's constantly changing. So I think there's a new normal every day, every minute of having to think through what an attacker might do. And so we've all heard of these huge viruses that come. You know, the attackers are usually the ones who are to spot the vulnerability. They go in, they then start to take down hundreds of thousands of computers, countries all around the world. And then, of course, they're the ones that want to sell you the solution. So it's ransomware. And so how do we start to think about how AI can be used for the good to prevent these attacks? And I do think that cybersecurity is becoming one of the most critical and emerging use cases in AI today.
Yeah, I think that, unfortunately, I agree. The bad folks that are out there are using AI to attack us. But most bad folks that are out there are just going after the lowest hanging fruit. And so where
But they don't have the data.
Pardon me?
They don't have the access to the data.
Yes, the vast majority of the bad guys are going after the low-hanging fruit, which means that there's a vulnerability in a web server, as an example, like an Apache Struts web server. And unfortunately, companies are too slow to patch that. So the easiest way, I think, for enterprises to start using AI is to look at the data that they have and help prioritize their processes internally. So for example, where to patch first of the 1,000 vulnerabilities that are out there. And there's companies that are out there. We have one in our portfolio called Scicognito, which is looking at enterprises from the outside, like an attacker would, but also using data through their own threat intelligence feed back to the beginning. What new data do they have that's unavailable out there to be able to help prioritize? And then there's companies like Kenna Security, where we're not an investor, where they're looking at the data and saying, this is where you need to patch first.
Great. Do you want to chime in, Puneet?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I think the problem's well stated. The hackers have better tools than the defenders in this world, and it's cheaper to attack at scale using automation than the people who are watching the attack occur can patch. And that's just a fundamental of the way the world is right now. And so therefore, I think cybersecurity is an incredibly robust category. There's rich business models on the backside of it, but it's also a game of sort of whack-a-mole. You got to be very careful because it's not just your mobile phone, it's not just your laptop, it's the cloud service you may have used intermittently, it's the email you got from someone that looks like it's from your domain that should be right, but it's misspelled slightly, but you didn't notice it. I mean, it's all those things. It's the one website that was hacked that you visited for good reasons, and then it infects your computer. I mean, there's so many things that are possible that it's almost impossible to win without a strategy that is data first and infrastructure first in some way. And so I agree with the logic that you look where the data is, you look where the most critical assets are, you protect them, you got to triage. You find the person that's coming into the ER that has the gash in the throat, plug that up first before you fix the guy with the broken leg. I mean, it's just obvious triage mechanisms that I think a lot of professionals in the industry know how to use and how to do at this point. But from an AI perspective and the idea of doing good, there's a lot of tools that are about automating things that should have been automated a long time ago, like SOCs, security operations centers that have tens, if not hundreds of people, where they should have thousands of people. Sometimes they have 3 people, right, to run it. And it's just clearly they're seeing data on a screen, they're looking for a little blip, and they're circling, and they're saying, that's bad. I mean, automate that. That should be done. That's very easy and obvious to do. And most enterprises just don't have the resources to do that, or they haven't been properly set up to solve those problems.
Speaking of AI for good, AI is all about how well you train it. Like, it's like teaching a child, a language. If you give it the right, in this case, in case of AI, if you provide it with the right ground truth and train it the right way, then it's gonna learn the right way and produce the right results. Otherwise, it could end up in Skynet or the Terminator, and that could be disastrous. So it's all about training.
Absolutely. Nobody wants Skynet. Okay, how about one more question? And let's talk about some of the exciting stuff that's coming up in AI and some of the cool trends. InSync, we'll start with you.
So what's interesting in AI now is this concept around sort of stateful or conversational AI, which is the AI's ability to learn how to learn. And it's this, and some people call it meta AI, where AI systems today are fairly constrained in terms of what are the possible outputs. So they're well optimized to know how to choose from state one to state end state, which is a wins condition. So they do these scorings and they understand kind of how to drive toward approximately great or good outcomes. And what people really want from an AI perspective is for it to then learn how to then take the next step forward. And so layering on some learnings from an intermediary sort of a point of view and then get to a greater outcome. So this level of unstructured kind of like, path designing is something that's still very much in research, but we think these are the things that are necessary if we're going to get into like chatbots that are actually smart. People struggle through chatbots today. I think it's a really idealistic goal for an AI system to know how to actually have fluid conversations, but it's actually very difficult because it lacks this ability to go from sort of state to state to state. So that's one area where there's a lot of great think tanks. Both Stanford, Berkeley have research around this topic.
Cool. You want to take it, Jean?
Well, I think one thing is just trying to think through, as you were mentioning around, the operation centers, automating everything. And so trying to make sure that there's few humans that have to touch. And so much of it is about staying one step ahead and about the speed that you can get in being able to detect and find things early on that are happening. Right now, too many tools, too many vendors, too many alerts, too much manual labor is really the fear of what's happening. And so we need to look to the hope. And I think that this is all about hope, especially in cybersecurity. It's about how do you give the hope to people that are trying to protect a digital way of life. And I think that's what we're looking forward to in the next couple of years.
Awesome.
I think what's interesting about AI and what's new is that it's really not new. I mean, if you look at every enterprise, they did try and solve through rules-based systems important problems. And to me, these AI startups, they just need to figure out what problem they really need to solve. They need to solve it better than what's happening in the enterprise today. It sounds simple, but so many of these companies are focused on being AI companies. And I think, having been doing this for about 20 years, I think it's going to be just like a company that I saw back in '99 saying that they're an internet company. No duh. Every company is going to be using AI and machine learning. And so for me, the areas that I think that are the most interesting are around risk management for enterprises, because that really is an area that boards really want better control over. And there's way too much data in the enterprise that they cannot get their hands onto. And so I still think that's a really good open opportunity.
So insurance companies are a big market then?
Exactly. It could be insurance companies, or just think about every company that's getting sued today. Really, the reason is because they did not manage their risk levels, and they can get sued for a whole bunch of different reasons.
Shalu, how about you?
I am super jazzed about AI in for good space. So for example, in South Africa, how do you predict hunger and poverty even before it hits, so that you can mitigate the chances for poverty? How do you predict that 15 girls coming out of a coast are going to be targets for human trafficking using AI? The transaction is going to happen in the next 30 minutes. How do you alert the criminal justice system? It's going to happen. And AI is going to tell you that. The other example is Agenda 2030, which is educating 30 million girls around the world who have no access to school or books, but they will be educated using big data, AI, and machine learning. So for me, I am so jazzed about that space to see even bigger use cases come out in the for good space.
Yeah, I think those are really incredible examples. There are like startups like Ahura AI that are actually working on leveraging AI for kind of tutoring young children and helping them learn. So I think that's really powerful. And I think that artificial intelligence can be extremely impactful. We have like a really cool startup called Atrium, and Jimmy Koo is here, who's like the GM of fundraising for Atrium. And what they're trying to do is leverage AI for law, kind of help startups. And this came out of, I think, Justin Kahn's interactions, building startups and working very closely with lawyers. And at the end, that was like, okay, this is like something that startup founders really want to resolve, like be able to work with lawyers but not have to pay a lot of money. And with a fixed price, they offer, they leverage AI to help with law. So I think that's, another use case of.
That's cool. I think the legal field is definitely ripe for disruption. It's like so paper heavy. Cool. What about you, Puneet?
No, I think it's, first of all, everyone, well said for everyone. I think AI is very transformational in different ways. What I'm concerned about in some ways is that corporations are going to use it for profit. That's their job, right? To maximize profit. Whereas we talked about in the private session that there was universities that should be doing it for good in some fashion, to either driving ethical AI or driving research in certain categories that really push the limits. When I was getting my grad degree, people went off and got jobs because it was the 90s and that was what people did, and that's how you made money. And so that's no different now. There's a gold rush. People get paid exorbitant salaries to work on recommendation engines for ad products, which if you think about that in a bigger system, maybe that's not the best use of their talents. And so it'd be great to see people being more directed towards some of these bigger problems, to solve those bigger problems with AI, as opposed to smaller consumer products that are out there.
Yeah, definitely. And just to add to that, I see a lot of startups that are working on or AI that is being put to use for efficiencies in the supply chain and helping to fuel a circular economy, which is really exciting. And some of the things that are happening on the ocean side in terms of identification of phytoplankton that will help identify early algae blooms. So lots of really exciting AI for good that's happening. And thank you all, amazing panelists. Let's give everybody a big hand for being here. And thank you, Aku, for putting this together.